Today, I'll introduce you to a sci-fi romance drama movie from 2016 titled Passengers. Spoilers ahead, so be cautious. The interstellar spaceship Avalon is voyaging through space toward a colonized world called Homestead 2. All its sections are vacant as the vessel operates on autopilot. The 258 crew members and 5,000 passengers are in hibernation. Unexpectedly, the ship traverses an asteroid belt, which weakens its shields. Power is redirected to the primary shield, but the ship is on a collision course with a massive asteroid. The collision causes various system malfunctions. While the ship initiates self-repairs, one of the hibernation pods activates. The passenger awakened is Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer. His pod opens, and an automated system assists his awakening, informing him that he has spent 120 years in suspended animation, and that the ship is only 4 months away from Homestead 2. He's assured that he will enjoy the luxurious amenities of the ship during this time. Jim receives instructions regarding his ID band, cabin, and the primary activities he's expected to participate in before reaching the planet. Eager and apprehensive to meet fellow passengers, he prepares, leaves his cabin, and enters an automated classroom for a group learning session. Jim appears slightly anxious as the hologram discusses Earth's situation, describing it as overpopulated, overpriced, and overrated. Despite being instructed to save questions for the end, Jim persistently asks why he's the only one present. Realizing the hologram can't provide answers, he sets out to find other people and reaches the ship's main concourse. Finding no one there, he approaches an automated information desk for assistance. Requesting to speak to a human, he's directed to a steward, but finds no one there either. He then requests to see the captain. Despite being unable to access the bridge, he observes that none of the main crew members are awake. Jim eventually heads to the observatory, discovering that the ship is actually 90 years away from Homestead 2. Realizing he woke up prematurely, he hurries back to the concourse and sends a message to Earth, seeking guidance on how to return to hibernation. However, he learns that a response from Earth would take approximately 55 years due to the costly communication. Jim is devastated. He explores the ship and stumbles upon the ship's bar, where he encounters another person. However, something seems off about him. As Jim converses with the bartender, he realizes that the other person is an android named Arthur. Jim is intrigued, but unable to comprehend how Arthur is present ahead of time. The next day, Jim wakes up in his cabin and heads to the cantina, where he notices that most menu items are reserved for gold-class passengers. Frustrated with his malfunctioning hibernation chamber, Jim attempts to fix it with the tools he gathers, but to no avail. He then tries to access the crew's hibernation chambers, encountering more failures. Throughout, minor malfunctions occur around the ship. Jim frequents the bar to drink and converse with Arthur, who offers him advice. Encouraged by Arthur, Jim decides to break into a gold-class room to enjoy himself. He explores the ship's amenities, but becomes increasingly miserable with solitude over time. One drunken day, Jim wanders around the hibernation pods and inadvertently finds himself in an airlock with spacesuits. He dons a suit and steps outside the ship, captivated by the view of space. However, he soon feels devastated by his loneliness. Returning inside, he briefly contemplates ending his life, but changes his mind, slipping on a bottle in the process. Upon standing, Jim notices a woman named Aurora in one of the pods and becomes drawn to her. He searches for her files, listens to her passenger interview, and becomes enamored with her. He spends time sitting beside her pod, listening to her interviews. In the bar, he reads some of her work and discusses it with Arthur, becoming obsessed with the irony of his situation. Jim can't shake thoughts of Aurora and starts contemplating the idea of waking her up too, longing for companionship amidst the vastness of space. Jim discusses his dilemma with the android, but Arthur fails to comprehend the ethical dilemma. Jim realizes that if he wakes Aurora up for his own benefit, he'd be stranding her with him, essentially dooming her to die on the ship. Initially deciding against it, Jim finds himself unable to let go of the idea as time passes. Eventually, he changes his mind and activates Aurora's pod. As Aurora goes through the awakening process, Jim hides and later goes to the main concourse, hoping to find her. They meet, and Jim explains their situation to her, taking her to the observatory. Aurora panics and wants to return to her pod, but Jim explains that there's no equipment on the ship to help them return to hibernation, effectively revealing that they're stranded. They return to the concourse, and Jim suggests that she rest, given her recent emergence from hibernation. Feeling sorry for Jim's solitude, Aurora empathizes with him. Feeling regretful, Jim returns to the bar and asks Arthur not to disclose that he woke Aurora. The next day, Aurora wakes up and seeks information about the hibernation pods. Jim joins her, and they have breakfast together. However, the information desk malfunctions as they leave. In the cantina, Aurora notices Jim's repetitive breakfast choices and arranges for him to access the gold-class menu. They discuss the possibility of fixing the pods, but Aurora remains determined, searching through the ship for solutions. Jim observes more malfunctions throughout the ship. Later, Aurora expresses her discontent with life on the Avalon, engaging in various activities, but growing increasingly aware of their predicament. She interviews Jim in the cantina, learning about his aspirations for a new life on the colony. In the observatory, Aurora reveals her original plan: to visit Homestead 2, spend a year there, and return to Earth as the first journalist to undertake such a journey, intending to write an extraordinary story. As Aurora becomes disheartened about finding a solution to their predicament, Jim devises a plan to lift her spirits. He takes her dancing, to the cinema, and to the basketball court, hoping to distract her from their situation. Finally, he introduces her to Arthur at the bar, where she momentarily relaxes before the reality of their predicament sinks in again. Jim, feeling guilty, stays with the android after Aurora leaves. Later, Jim is seen tinkering with something, and the other Aurora walks into the observatory to find a miniature of the Chrysler building that Jim made for her. They go on a date at the bar, sharing stories about their lives. Aurora reveals that her father passed away when she was a teenager. After dinner, Jim takes Aurora to the airlock, and they venture out for a spacewalk together. Experiencing the magnificence of space together, they share a kiss upon returning inside and spend the night together in Jim's cabin, marking the beginning of their romantic relationship. Aurora moves into Jim's cabin and begins writing about her life on the ship. They engage in various activities together, exploring the ship further and celebrating Aurora's birthday in one of the ship's restaurants, and then at the bar. Meanwhile, Jim prepares a ring for Aurora while she chats with Arthur in the bar. The android inadvertently reveals to Aurora that Jim intentionally woke her up, leading to a confrontation between Jim and Aurora. Hurt and angry, Aurora leaves Jim's cabin, taking all her belongings with her. Despite Jim's attempts to apologize and explain, Aurora remains unforgiving, unable to forgive him for robbing her of her planned life. As tensions rise, the ship faces critical errors and malfunctions become more frequent. In the midst of chaos, Jim plants a tree in the main concourse, a symbol of hope amidst their struggles. Aurora heads to the cantina, where the food dispenser is also malfunctioning. Suddenly, they both hear the voice of the deck chief over the comms, inquiring about the tree. Rushing to the concourse, they find Gus Mancuso standing in front of Jim's tree. After introductions, they inform the chief about the situation, who is baffled by the pod failures. Mancuso takes them to the bridge, where they discover a system malfunction that requires manual checks. As they leave the bridge, a robot nearly falls on them, prompting Mancuso to investigate further. He shows them how to collect data on the malfunctions, which have been occurring more frequently. Mancuso checks the pods, joined by Jim, who figures out the issue with Aurora's pod. The deck chief is appalled by Jim's actions. Later, as Aurora joins Mancuso on the bridge, they discuss her pod situation, but Mancuso admits there's little he can do. Jim arrives with another malfunctioning robot, causing Mancuso to feel unwell and leave for rest, coughing up blood as he exits. That night, Aurora struggles to sleep and decides to swim. Suddenly, gravity is lost throughout the ship, and she starts drowning as the water from the pool moves with her. Barely making it out alive when gravity resets, she encounters Jim on her way to find Mancuso. The trio reconvenes on the bridge, slowly uncovering the ship's issues, tracing them back 2 years to a major system failure. Realizing the urgency, they set out to fix the problem, but Mancuso faints, and Jim and Aurora rush him to the infirmary. With no treatments available, Mancuso's condition deteriorates rapidly. In a poignant moment in the observatory, Mancuso entrusts Jim with his ID bracelet, urging them to fix the ship before passing away. Suddenly, the ship's lights shift to an alarming red, and it begins to shake. Jim implores Aurora for help, and they rush towards engineering. However, another failure occurs in the gravity drive, affecting Arthur as well. Jim deactivates him in an effort to stabilize the situation. In engineering, they pinpoint the problem in the power plant, but as they open the hatch, Aurora gets sucked into a breach caused by the asteroid. Jim holds on to the hatch, preventing himself from being sucked in completely. Once inside, they quickly seal the breach, but realize there are more breaches in the hull. They trace the trajectory of the meteor and find it has damaged the reactor control computer. Jim locates replacement parts and changes them, but venting the reactor still fails. Realizing he needs to open the vent door from outside the ship, Jim prepares to venture out. Before leaving, he gives Aurora Mancuso's bracelet, uncertain if he'll return. Aurora helps him with the suit and expresses her fear of losing him. At the reactor, Aurora faces critical temperatures as Jim approaches the vent door from the outside. As Jim attempts to bypass the vent door, he realizes he must manually hold it open for the reactor to vent. Despite Aurora's protests, Jim insists they must save the other passengers. Aurora reluctantly agrees and vents the reactor, successfully stabilizing the situation. However, Jim's tether breaks, and he starts losing pressure in his suit. Aurora rushes to his aid, managing to rescue him despite the perilous circumstances. In the infirmary, she uses Mancuso's bracelet to override medical protocols and revive Jim, ultimately forgiving him for his actions. They fix Arthur and give Mancuso a space burial. Jim reveals to Aurora his plan to use the medical pod as a hibernation chamber for her to ride out the rest of the journey. However, Aurora decides to stay awake with him on the ship, declining the offer of hibernation. Together, they face the challenges ahead, determined to make the most of their time together aboard the Avalon. Jim finally proposes to Aurora, and they spend their lives together on the ship. 88 years later, the Avalon finally arrives at Homestead 2. As the crew awakens, they are surprised to find the ship in an unexpected state. Aurora leaves them a message, recounting the story of her and Jim's life on the ship, while the rest were in hibernation. Their love story, filled with challenges, sacrifices, and ultimately forgiveness, serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of love, even in the most extraordinary circumstances. You're welcome. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. Thanks for watching.